Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Well, I would say good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. It's so great to see you all today, see familiar faces and names of people's work that I have read and followed, but maybe haven't met. So thanks all for being here today. So the glossary entry that we're going to work with today is the one titled Things and Thing Power. I co-wrote this with Carol Taylor. And so we'll spend a little time with reading it and thinking with the whiteboard. I was looking at some of the previous recorded sessions and noticed that you all have been using the whiteboard. So we'll use the whiteboard on Zoom. But I also asked you to bring, if you had it, some string and scissors, writing utensils and things like that. So if you have that, we'll engage with that a little bit later on in relation to a video clip that we'll be watching together. So I'm Candace Kuby, and I'm at the University of Missouri. And great to see Mitzi, who was my dissertation advisor. Always great to see you, Mitzi. So I will start just a little bit about when we were putting the glossary together. Things and thing power was a concept that I was really interested in writing and thinking around. In my work of scholarship, I really am interested in relational pedagogies and the materiality in classroom spaces, whether that's with young children or in higher education. And so I think a lot about things and the materials in the classroom, humans and the more than human aspects of classrooms. And so that was one reason that I was excited to get to write this glossary entry. And so the inspiration, if you've already taken a peek at the glossary entry, comes from Jane Bennett's book, Vibrant Matter. So some of you or most of you might have read that book before, or been familiar with it. So to get us started today, if George is okay with sharing the screen, I'm going to read the part that I wrote, but would love if somebody could read the part that Carol wrote. So Carol's part is italicized. And so I'm going to invite somebody to read along with me in that way. And then the rest of us, if as we're reading, if you can think about perhaps a phrase, a question that comes from it as you hear it, or a word that sort of sticks with you that you would like to move into the whiteboard space in a few minutes. So thinking about a phrase, a question that's produced, a word that sticks with you, and then we'll move that into thinking with it in the whiteboard space. So is there somebody who would be willing to read Carol's part, the italicized part? And I can't see everybody if somebody raises their hand, so let me. Anybody willing?
Candace, I'll read Carol's part.
Thanks, Sally. Good to see you. All right, so this glossary entry is things and things power. Things, it sounds so unimportant. As a writer, if I use the word thing, editors often ask me to be more specific, to replace the word. Things don't seem to have much power, specificity, or presence. The word thing comes across as vague and unimportant.
We say when we meet a friend, "How are things?" A question which expresses interest and care, but whose specificity is low, so gives the responder maximum time to say what they wish. Perhaps there is something in this mode of questioning that we can take up in the post-Anthropocene research frame. How can we activate this question's equivalence to find out about things and what they do, their effects and affects, their relations and resonances? Jane Bennett, 2010, gives us a clue. She recommends we follow the scent of things and to pursue a thingly methodology by lingering in those moments during which we find ourselves fascinated by objects. This is helpful. Let's try it.
In post-philosophy, things are thought differently. Jane Bennett's 2010 book, Vibrant Matter, A Political Ecology of Things, is instrumental in my understanding of the vitality of things and thing power. Part of chapter 2, entitled The Blackout, has stuck with me. She refers to an electrical power grid blackout in the US by quoting a newspaper. Quote, "The vast but shadowy web of transmission lines, power generating plants and substations known as the grid is the biggest gizmo ever built. On Thursday, the 14th of August, 2003, the grid's heart fluttered. Complicated beyond full understanding, even by experts, the grid lives and occasionally dies by its own mysterious rules, end quote. She goes on to write about non-humans such as electricity, machines, and grids. Electricity or electrons on the move are never totally predictable. Things have thing power, or as she writes about in the book, distributed agency with other non-humans and humans.
Jeanette's invocation drew me back to a specific classroom and to a particular series of objects, bodies, space entanglements. Via Bennett's Thing Power, I, Carol, reviewed how mundane classroom materialities, a chair, a pen with a fluffy top, a flip chart, a t-shirt, entangle with us in lively human, non-human assemblages of vital matter to constitute engendered relations. My advice is, don't ask what things mean, ask what they do.
This notion of distributed agency isn't to anthropomorphize non-humans. Rather, it is an ontological understanding about the liveliness of the world coming to be through relationships. The agency or thing power doesn't happen by an object, a person, art supply, animal, plant, etc., but rather through, with, and in relationship, or among or between bodies, as subjectivity doesn't exist a priori, but instead in relational fields. In my scholarship on young children becoming writers with a range of artistic and digital tools, I've thought about thing power. For example, in an article entitled Persistencing, Post-Human Agency in a Writer's Studio, we focus on a three-dimensional paper cabin that came to be by the thing power among a child. Brown construction paper, tape, stapler, glue, the desk, and. We create the concept of persistencing to discuss the thing power or agency among all bodies. The human didn't control the non-human bodies, but rather worked with them and was sometimes surprised and even frustrated by how the materials worked with her. There was a liveliness in the 3D cabin coming to life among all bodies.
Another time, I pursued the lively matterings that tables produce. I explored how tables in post-humanist thinking recast how we think about ontology, epistemology, and ethics.
I have also written about lively pedagogies in higher education, as doctoral students are invited to work with theories, data, and artistic and digital tools. We write about using, or the lively packets of relations, in a qualitative research course, specifically focusing on one student, Gigi, and her making, thinking, creating with things. Pedagogical spaces are full of things and thing power.
In another project, a colleague and I invited participants to tell us about the things they surrounded themselves with at work. We took a composite photograph of our collective things. This photo provoked two further things, a coaster and postcard in ongoing entanglements and assemblages.
We invite you to consider things, and more specifically, the relational post-philosophies inspired ways of thinking about agency among, with, and in things, human, non-human, more than human bodies, or thing power. How might this provoke your research practices, teaching practices, or really just living practices, and how you see the world coming to be? Thank you, Sally, for reading Carol's part alongside. And at the bottom of the document there, you can see that we put a couple of video clips. We're going to actually watch one a little bit later, and then also lectures. Sometimes I find lectures really helpful by an author to hear them talking about their work. So thank you, George. All right, so let's spend a little bit of time. George has told me that you all have used the whiteboard function here on Zoom, and so you're familiar with it, but if not, let us know and we can help you kind of understand the Canvas and where to find the tools. So let's spend a little bit of time thinking with the reading, the glossary entry. If there's a phrase, a question, a word, a part that has really prompted your thinking and stick with you, maybe we'll take a few minutes before we open up a space for conversation to give people a little time to put items on the whiteboard.
I've put some sticky notes just in case there's anyone who isn't comfortable to use the whiteboard. You can just double click on the sticky note and it should allow you to type on it. But you don't, yeah, feel free to put text or what, yeah, to be free.
All right, I still see people adding and working here, but let's open up a space if people want to share out a little bit about what they're thinking, what stuck with them from the glossary entry. I see some questions here. Who would like to get us started?
I didn't write this, but I'm quite interested by this question. What does it mean to make something, to make with and in correspondence with things, material? Perhaps someone could say more about that.
That was my question. Um, to me, it's always an app. Like every time I think about, the agentic nature of materials, thing power, I always connect it to, my work as an artist with children and the idea of making it and how it disrupts them this idea that and children's ideas just come from their heads, which is such a convention in early childhood. But then how do we see this making process? How do we see the liveliness of the things that children or we are working with, what they do? Again, it's that question, what do things do, not what do they mean? But how do we see this making process?
Others, what catches your eye? What are you thinking about?
Just on that last comment there, I, I just think of the number of times that kids say things like, this paper made me blah, 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 or this color made me think to, or made me blah, do whatever it is they're making. The kids talk about the relations a lot of times, and I forget about them a lot of times. So just looking to the students and how they see those relations, I think can be really helpful.
So Mitzi, your comment reminds me of one of the examples that I wrote about in the glossary entry about the cabin that came to life. And I remember standing there, watching this student fold brown construction paper and tried to make stairs to go inside the cabin to make a second level. And in my mind, there were certain materials that I thought would work better. But it's not what she selected. And I had to kind of restrain myself as the adult to come in and tell her, like, I think glue would work better, or tape, or a stapler. And her working with and the folding of the paper and how that produced something, frustration. It also produced joy. And she stuck with it for over 20 minutes. And didn't seem to give up because, the working with the paper and the materials that she had chosen. So it's interesting how she embraced that relation. Even for me, it looked quite frustrating, but she seemed to find much joy in that relation of the materiality. So, all right, anything else here on the whiteboard, something that sticks out before we move to a video clip and think a little bit more about the notion of thing and thing power?
I also really appreciated the comment about staying with the specificity of things because I think that's so connected. It's not just any brown paper, it's this brown paper, it's this shape, it's this tape, it's this color. It's always the thisness of things really matters in these engagements and trying to get a sense of how is this making happening? How are things being created together with the things? It matters the nature of those things and what happens in the touch, not just in the sight, but in the touch and the feel and the working with it.
Mm. Yes. All right, so George, were you going to say something? Oh.
I was just gonna say that what Sylvia said made me think about. So the thing I wrote was vitality, and just I think this is not a new word to me, but it struck me, I guess, it just feels like such a beautiful word to use in this situation. Like there's like a preciousness to to me. That word just feels like a really beautiful way to explain thing power. And what Sylvia said now made me think of that actually it's about the vitality of the materials.
So I'm going to invite us to watch one of the clips that Jane Bennett references in chapter 2 of the book Vibrant Matter. And this is a clip that talks about the blackouts of the power grid. And so while we're watching it, I'm going to encourage you to think about the glossary entry that we read together, but also some of the questions or concepts that came up, like vitality, specificity. We don't have the whiteboard right in front of us right now, but just thinking about some of the sticky notes and the things that you noticed on the whiteboard. And this is the time that if you'd like to get out your string and your writing utensils, and if you have paper, I thought string would be a great material to work with for the concepts of things and thing power, specifically because we're going to be exploring an electrical grid. And grids, if you think about them, are connected with lines, so string. And so if you have small sheets of paper, feel free to sketch or draw. Or you could write words on it and then see what happens, with the string. There's not really a set direction here, but it might be helpful for you to think with string, the paper, as you're watching the clip. And then we'll have a little bit of time after the clip for you to continue to work with the materials and what is provoked for you from the video clip. So we tested it out a few minutes ago and it was a little bit loud. So I'm going to turn the sound down a good bit to start, and then we can just make sure we get it at a good level for everyone. This clip is about 10 minutes long. So just kind of know that you'll have a little time to just write and think and make as it's going in relation to the concept that we're working with. So let me see if I can get it to work here. Let me turn our volume down some. All right, can you at least see it right now?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, well, I'm going to play it and let's see if the sound is okay for you.
We are in the midst of what appears to be a colossal and history-making blackout.
People trapped in elevators and buildings, they have activated.
Is the sound working okay? Or is it too loud or too soft?
I feel like it's good, unless anyone has another opinion. It's fine for me. Thank you.
Say that one more time, George.
Oh, no, I was saying that it's, from my side, it's perfect.
Okay, so here we go.
Activated the emergency command center.
You're staggering, trying to take in as much information as you can.
Mayor Bloomberg's advice is to go straight home.
The subway system is down.
Ottawa is completely without power now.
The lightning-quick domino series of failures.
Gotta go to the bathroom and you can't even go nowhere.
50 million people are thought to have lost power.
In 2003, a massive blackout struck major areas of the U.S. and Canada and was perceived as a wake-up call for the nation.
We've got a real crisis in our grid, and this is why, despite being a superpower, we have a grid that is comparable to a third world country, and that's not right.
But have 10 years of planning and preparation left us better off today?
I don't think you can ever say with 100% confidence we won't have a blackout.
Stop researching with ChatGPT. Its information is not reliable, and you can't use
Electricity is really far more important than anyone realizes. We take it for granted, we flick the switch and it goes on, but it has to be in balance or the lights go out.
There has been a massive power outage throughout much of the Northeast, both of the United States and of Canada.
Millions and millions of people were caught by surprise when the electrical grid suddenly crashed.
It shut down 100 power plants, from Ottawa down to Cleveland and as far east as New York.
The most immediate concern was for thousands believed to be stranded underground in the dark in the New York subway system or in elevators in skyscrapers.
The attacks of 9/11 were pretty fresh in everybody's mind, and the first thought on almost every New Yorker that I spoke to's mind was, is this terrorism?
The police are saying that the evacuation procedures are working, people are calm, and that they are getting out.
A normal August afternoon had turned to crisis. Around 50 million people across the US and Canada were left without power.
All of Cleveland's water supply runs on electric pumps.
My water commissioner said, the people in the Heights have water for 3 hours. I said, water? I thought the electric was out. He said, Mayor, how do you think the water gets from the lake to the people in the Heights?
You can get along in the dark, you can get along in the heat, but water becomes a health and safety issue very quickly.
While terrorism was soon ruled out, there was a frenzied search to unravel the mystery behind the source of the blackout.
We don't know yet what went wrong, but we will.
What we're hearing on the radios is that there was some sort of incident in Ontario, Canada.
There was a lot of finger pointing.
U.S. officials initially accused a mishap at a Canadian utility plant. The mayor of Toronto fired back.
Tell me, have you ever seen the United States take blame for anything?
It took 29 hours for the power to be turned back on in most major cities, but the brief outage contributed to at least 11 deaths and caused an estimated $6 billion in economic losses.
We were fortunate that the grid stayed up as it did and it didn't continue cascading any further.
Engineers spent months unraveling the cause of the blackout and traced it not to New York or Canada, but to a downed power line in Ohio.
The theory was it was a tree in suburban Cleveland. And we were like, what?
The official report later found it was a series of human and operational failures that set the blackout in motion. A downed power line went unnoticed because the alarm system failed at the local power company, First Energy, and soon other lines were overloaded.
When the line overheated, it sagged. And as it sagged, it hit a tree that shouldn't have been in the right-of-way corridor.
Meanwhile, at the regional service operator, Midwest ISO, an employee had gone to lunch and forgot to turn back on the tool that monitored grid problems.
As the grid in Ohio got less and less stable, with too much voltage over too few lines, power plants began to turn off. And eventually it cascaded around the Lake Erie Loop and all the way to New York.
Investigators said today this nation's worst power blackout was mostly the fault of the First Energy Corporation of Akron, Ohio.
First Energy was busy trying to grow, trying to absorb other companies. And the report found that they had let many basic things go. That included tree trimming under these power lines. Their computers hadn't been upgraded. There was more than that.
First Energy declined to speak with us, but has publicly said it implemented new safeguards. Many saw the blackout as emblematic of a wider problem, one brought about by a lack of government oversight for years in the electric industry.
The standards are voluntary and not enforceable.
It's like expecting your kids, when you walk out of the room and leave a pile of candy, not to help themselves, unless you've said, there will be consequences if you grab that pile of candy.
First Energy was never fined for its role in the blackout. In 2005, Brownell's agency, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, was finally given the power to impose hefty fines and has levied tens of millions of dollars in penalties since 2010. But fundamental issues remain.
It still doesn't quite make sense to me that the grid was that vulnerable.
It's a big old system. When it started, you had a little local system. You had an electric power provider, a plant, a spider web of wires around the plant to serve customers near the plant. Then you put together a national system where you connect all those spider webs. It's grown up over a long period of time, and there just isn't one center or one organization or one entity that's in control of the whole system.
There have been improvements since the blackout, including those that allow power companies to better monitor usage. The goal is to use that information to redirect power across the nation's grid in real time to stop blackouts before they start.
At some point, there may be a breakthrough where it becomes very efficient and effective to store energy, in that you'll be able to shift energy uses to different parts of the day as one grid, as one system. And I think that will dramatically change how this industry is operated.
We have perhaps $1 trillion that needs to be invested in the electric grid to bring it up to the speed we want it to be to serve the needs of this country. We're really living on our great-grandparents willing to spend money on roads, on bridges, on electric transmission lines. We haven't done that in a long time, and we have to get real about that.
Massive blackouts continue to be a global problem. 15 million people lost power in Europe in 2006, 60 million in Brazil and Paraguay in 2009, and more than 500 million in India in 2012. Such events have fueled the imagination of TV writers, who have added their own twist.
It's going to turn off and it will never, ever turn back on.
This may be fiction, but former Senator Dorgan, who worked for years on congressional energy committees and recently wrote a novel speculating about a terrorist attack on the power grid, says the threat today is bigger than a few downed power lines.
We know from lots of anecdotal examples that the terrorists that use cyber terror are very inventive. They know that if they could bring down an electric power grid system, that would cause really maximum damage. This is a big, big challenge for our country.
The collective result of these kinds of attacks could be a cyber Pearl Harbor.
This week, more than 200 private and public energy companies will stage a large-scale mock blackout. No lights will go out, but the drill will test how government and utility workers would react if the grid went down.
If you bring down the electric power grid system in this country and it stays down for any length of time at all, it'll wreck the American economy. So we've got a lot at stake, and we better keep our eye on the ball.
All right, so maybe, George, if you would put the whiteboard back up in case people want to work in that space as well, but also if people have the string that they've been working with, the paper, sketches, writing, maybe we'll spend a few minutes just continuing to think with the concept of things and thing power in relation to the example of the blackout. So whichever mode, whichever way that you prefer to think with, feel free. If we were in a classroom space all together, it would be a lot of fun to use our string and yarn with our bodies and how we're thinking about it. But in a digital space here, we can use the whiteboard or continue to work with your hands and the materials that you have for a few more minutes.
In some of the sessions, people have added photographs of what they've been doing onto the whiteboard, so maybe that could also be nice.
Yes, that'd be great.
If anyone isn't sure to do that, you can also just put it in the chat and I can put it on the whiteboard for you. Or you can pop me a WhatsApp or an email. If I may say, it is quite interesting because I live in South Africa and blackouts are very normal for us. We're all a bit scared to talk about it because it hasn't happened in a while, and I think there's a general feeling that we shouldn't say anything in case it jinxes it. But you know, load shedding really since I can remember, it's just been a part of our lives. And you know that the electricity is going to turn off at certain parts of the day, and sometimes it turns off when you're not expecting it. And I don't know, it was just interesting to see the response of, obviously it's different when you're planning for it, but just how, like that man said that, you know, it would wreck the American economy, but that is like our reality, you know. I found that really interesting to watch as a South African.
Thanks for that, George. Yes, I thought about that too after visiting South Africa a couple of times and experiencing load shedding. And so watching the clip, I definitely connected in that way. I appreciate you sharing that perspective.
Yeah, and especially the politics of that, you know, connecting with what I put up about Heathrow a couple of weeks ago, and then people were interviewed and then comparing that with South Africa and the incredible, yeah, how devastating that is, and you know, in so many different ways for so many people, and especially people who cannot afford generators and all of that. And then the people talking about Heathrow, how devastating they were because they missed a connection, or and you think, oh, yeah, these deep inequalities, right, in the world. Thanks for putting up my photo, George. Would you mind putting it horizontally? That's how I was just sort of working with the pattern. Thanks. Oh, yes, 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 that's it. But yeah, perfect. Mitzi is losing connectivity. That's actually quite ironic in the context.
Hillary, I love this.
Nice. I'm so intrigued by the question, are we things too? And what difference would it make if we, you know, works both ways, isn't it? You know, in terms of equality, and if we saw ourselves as things, or if, you know, things saw themselves, because if that sounds like devaluing yourself, which actually is an interesting thing, isn't it? That it would mean devaluing yourself and you see yourself as a thing. I'm not just a thing, but actually, what does that say about things?
I was actually going to ask about that because in the video, they're looking for someone to blame, aren't they? So they want to know what happened. And they were quick to identify that company, but they're explaining all the different things that led up to it, like you know, the thing that didn't work, and then it touched the tree, and then so like things get a pass all the time, don't they? Things can't be held consequential all the time, and we look for something. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is their agency isn't always acknowledged, and we're still looking for people, a person behind something, which I think is interesting, because things are quite often the only things considered to be real. You know, so we grasp for reality through materiality of things, but yet the inertness, the implied inertness of a thing always takes that agency away, which is a bit ironic, I think.
Yeah, I was struck by the tree as well when I watched the clip. It sort of made me chuckle, but you know, they were trying to point a finger at a human, but this the trees that we're doing what trees do, they grow and they stretch in their branches. And, you know, it was amazing to me that that was kind of the interaction, this tree and the lines that started to sag and all of that, that togetherness, that in between, that relational piece of the power line and the tree is, you know, what produced this in relation to humans. And the person who went to lunch and forgot to switch the switch back on, and you know, all of these things, all the ands and ands that produce this massive blackout. But like you said, the rhetoric, the political aspect behind it, the capitalistic economic, you know, downside of not having the power grid on, all these other things also are very much a part of it. So thanks for bringing that up, Angela. All right, what else are we thinking about? Or I'm trying to look across the whiteboard here, see some images and text coming together. And fascinating with some of these photos. Can someone, do people mind sharing a little bit about some of the photos here and what they were thinking with, and as the video was on, and the concepts?
I can say a little bit about my knitting, which is this one here at the bottom, in the middle. And what I felt was, I mean, this particular yarn is from a South African company. They're women, and they dye their own yarn, and you never know what's happening next. So when you, it's really beautiful. When you knit, then you create all sorts of patterns, and then suddenly you see, oh, there's a whole thread going off somewhere, doing its own thing. And I never really used to like that. I usually used to put colors together myself and then created a pattern. But now I really like where this takes me. And so what I wasn't going to knit actually today, I was going to do as I was told. But I couldn't help just picking up the knitting again, because it just felt that the difficulty of, through the words that we use and the grammar of our language, that it is constantly trying to put the relationality back together again, rather than that it always already is relational, but sort of almost that the words pull it apart, and then you have to put things back together again in relation. But of course, we know they always already are. And in unexpected ways, you know, you have no idea where what is and what isn't related, you know, like in interaction, because so much of it has nothing to do with humans, or with human bodies. So yeah, that's sort of, but it was completely, it just went. I didn't think about it too much, and then I realized what I was doing. Preconscious, I think. Is it Aaron Manning would say?
Anyone else? Thanks for sharing, Karen.
That hand with the yarn is mine. And I was kind of just wrapping doing almost like a bandage, and it was quite, I enjoyed the feeling of it, but then at the end, I suddenly felt really trapped. And I just, get this thing off me. My hand is cramping. I hate this. So it was really like interesting that it went from being like a really enjoyable experience of like, oh, going around the fingers while I'm listening. And then suddenly I really didn't like it anymore. Yeah, the it made me feel really like just a moment of, not in a horrible way, but just a moment of anxiety, like, oh, this thing is actually on me and I don't want it to be.
So Karen, I'm not sure if you want to kind of co-facilitate now, given that I had an hour before I had to go to my next meeting of the day. So we kind of wanted to, I guess, take inventory and see how people might want to continue to think with the concept, continue to work together. So Karen, I'm not sure if you want to facilitate that. You're on mute though.
Well, that doesn't help, does it, when I'm muted? Okay, so I mean, I have a suggestion, but I think before that, maybe just say thank you very much, Candace. And usually what we do, but I don't know whether you notice that my computer is doing funny things, which is not very nice when I'm about to travel, but it just switches it off now and again. Maybe that's also it's exerting its power. So I didn't introduce you at the beginning, and I think it would be just maybe nice if maybe you can say something about your work, Candace, where you are and what your speciality is, and then we just say goodbye to you, and then we move on.
Sounds great. Yeah, I did a brief introduction maybe while you were logging back in.
Okay.
Yeah. So at the University of Missouri, and my work is around relational pedagogies with young children, as well as how we think about our teaching of qualitative inquiry in higher education. And this is a glossary entry, a pedagogical invitation. Like I said, if we were in person, it's fun to actually use the string with our bodies and think about it more in a more of a physical movement kind of way. But in a digital space, having a whiteboard and a way to be able to do that collectively here is kind of a modification or an adaptation for that. So inviting people to think about how string might be a great tool to interact with, if you're in a physical classroom with people together. So I think that's it, Karen. I really enjoyed just being able to be here for a little bit today. And sorry that I need to cut out here after an hour to get to my next thing. But thanks, Karen, for being willing to continue to facilitate the thinking around the concept.
Lovely. Thank you. Yeah, no, looking forward to it, actually. I'm sure we'll have plenty of things to do. So take care, and thanks for doing this, and see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Karen. Thanks all. Good to see you all today.
Bye. Bye-bye. Yeah, I was just thinking, see what people, maybe we can go into smaller groups in the breakout rooms and come up, maybe, is there a question that Candace would say would stick, would linger, and that you maybe would like to, to answer together, have an inquiry about. So maybe what you could do is that take a screenshot of this before you go into the breakout rooms. And then maybe when you come back, you can either circle the question that you really would like to go for as a group, or you might want to put a new one up with a maybe in a color that hasn't been used yet, or in really big letters or something like that. So it's really, oh, you can share a file. Ah, is that okay? No worries.
I just shared a screenshot of the board.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Too fast for me. So it's in there, so you can use that. And then maybe if you could split us up into groups, and I'm just thinking what would be a good thing to do. there are 8 of us. So maybe in 2 groups of 4 or 3 groups of 3. What do people prefer? Maybe 4? Come back. Have you got a new question, or are you embracing one that is already on there? The other group. I was in one group, and maybe we start with a group I was not in. My head hurts. Oh, your thing hurts.
Charlotte, why don't you start? Because you had there was so much being produced there that wasn't necessarily material.
I love Thing Power. I work with Bennett's work in my research a lot. And it's one of those things, one of those concepts that I'm just so in love with, that Thing has agency and is invitational. And it's so complex to try and get thoughts around. And in the webinar session reading today, I'm having the argument in my head just back and forth, almost like I've got 3 different people in the room talking to each other, having this conversation, and they're arguing with each other around this concept. And it's like I can't get away from some of those ingrained ways of thinking that things are perceived as static. But I know from research and my engagement with the more than human and the non-human world that things are agentic. So then all of that is going on in my head. So I'm having several conversations in my head between the power of thing and thingness, and then the rebuttal that comes back that says, you know, I've quoted Miller before, but when there's no such thing as subject and object, we're all objects. So if we extend that, where there's no such thing as human and object, we're all things. There's no such thing as human and thing, we're all things. But things is laden with this idea of being static, but we know that it's not static. We know that it's dynamic. And so these are the tangles that are going on, and I'm having all of the back and forth to a point where I'm not sure I'm producing anything coherent other than lots of extra thought that is just bouncing around. It's just like pating, 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 pating. So we were talking about how the word thing as a thing is producing thinking tangles, like entangled thinking. No, I don't think it's an alternative. I'm just, because subject and object is a linguistic thing, isn't it? Like subject, verb, object, like that idea and ownership and whatnot. It's just I was playing with some of that philosophy and not just seeing things as something. So we were then talking about, so I'm a collage artist, like I use collage a lot in my research, and it's, if you think, and I'm surrounded by collage, which is why this is an example, but we were talking about how in the making, if you have an assemblage of the human and the non-human or the more than human, and you are, as a researcher, cutting things out, and then as you cut something rips or changes, it's almost like the agency of that piece of paper steps into the front. It's never not had agency, it's just now louder than previously. So I was talking about murmuration. If you think about birds in a murmuration, there's always a bird at the front that's leading that flock, but that murmuration changes. So each of those birds has agency, each of those birds is part of the collective, is part of the assemblage. But at any given moment, that front leader will move and change. And I see thing power like that we are all part of that murmuration, and at different moments we have a front bird, but that might shift and change with the thing power. Yeah, so we're all already part of that.
It's really closely connected to what was discussed in our group. Maybe Hillary or someone else in the group can. We went back to the are we things, and Hillary's concern about already talking about thing and non-things and or nothings or human things and non-human things. I don't know, Hillary, whether you would like to say anything or.
Well, it's almost as though things are set up in a binary with things that are assumed to have vitality. So there's almost a binary between living, vital things and non-living objects that have to be seen as also having vitality. And it bothers me because in a relational ontology, everything is interacting and affecting everything else and becoming in relation to one another. And within that kind of ontology, it's self-evident that everything, whether it's material or discursive or living or supposedly not living, is contributing to that relationality. So that the power of things is almost taken for granted. You don't have to argue for it. But at the same time, I think that what Bennett was doing sort of predated my real understanding of the power to affect and be affected. And so was very helpful in providing examples of thing power that helps you then when you move into a relational ontology to be more aware of how everything is contributing to the becoming of everything else. So for me, it's almost like I don't need thing power anymore. I did at one point, but if I'm trying to think about how things interact with each other and affect each other, I would not be thinking that some things in that interaction did not have power.
But I think in all fairness, and we talked about that, is that Bennett's think power comes from Spinoza. So that everything would have vitality, it's not as if, because all things strive. So it wouldn't start with a binary. And I think it wasn't visible enough maybe today that that's the case. But I just picked up, and what you were saying reminded me of what Bharat says about things. I put it in the chat. Things, and it's a quotation mark from her, don't pre-exist, and the whole thing is a citation. They are agentially enacted and become determinately bounded and propertied within phenomena. And that is what you're saying, isn't it? They don't exist before. They are phenomena. And then remind me of Donna Haraway and how, like a leaf, she talks about the safety pin. I don't know whether you know that bit. It's beautiful, actually. And traces the object of the thing, the safety pin. And as always, already relational. Let me just see what she says about that. But I think that it so depends, because when I first came to Bennett, I also felt, oh, okay, so this is really allocating power to things, maybe a bit like object-oriented ontology. where you've got those objects there and they assert power and blah, 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 rather than starting somewhere else. But I have been convinced otherwise, actually, from some really good articles on that.
I think thing power is quite a useful way of explaining or of noticing, helping you to notice things in a different way. I think it's quite a nice pedagogical concept to help one think about what it is or how things perform in relation to other things.
And I so like the notion of responsibility. So it really is allowing the thing to give the ability to respond, right?
So in response to Sylvia, I think that's a kind of no-brainer. You know, like if you're watching kids interacting with things, you see how things teach them, what they learn from things, what they do with things, how they affect one another. I think it's a really important part about thinking about how things affect children's becoming.
But it also means disrupting some of the very strongly held conventions on childhood creativity, that a child is like a little container full of creativity, give them materials and they'll just, lots of freedom, and they just pour out their ideas there. Like, it's such a dominant view that it interrupts being able to see, often for my students especially, and many educators, being able to see things differently. That what if you actually saw materials as active participants and began to notice things differently, rather than just that what appears sometimes is just the child pouring out their own ideas as if they're a little container.
Yeah, I like that.
That's a really nice book, by the way, that you're just putting up there. Encounters with Materials in Early Childhood Education. That's a really lovely book.
Who put that up where?
It's in the chat. So Sylvia actually put the link to companion website
Okay.
with Materials in Early Childhood Education. And that's with Veronica and Laurie. It's really nice. And also how, and we work with that a lot at the moment in our project, is how the materials it really is thinking with the hands, right? How on Saturday again, how the materials and the playing with it was just he was giving an hour. We took the kids to a cemetery, and then afterwards we had a philosophical inquiry, and how through the materials, the answers to the question of what happens when we die, he was just very playfully just giving an answer through the play with a tiny little Lego skeleton that got stuck in plasticine, and then the humor that this person died because it got stuck in concrete. Absolutely love it. So how Yeah, so it is a very playful engagement with materials, right? Thinking with hands, thinking with, which a lot of philosophers also really subscribe to. And we don't just think with our heads and brains or whatever, but even that's also materials, right? It's also material, as it was in this particular glossary one, wasn't it? In this entry about how thoughts are also things. Or maybe I read it somewhere else.
So when I put up the twisted power cord, okay, when I sort of looking around for something around me that looked like string, the only thing I could find was a power cord. So I started twisting the power cord. And that was before we went into the power failure. So there was something about starting with a power cord, then you look at a power blackout. Then I think about how, in order to play with that, I had to pull it out of my phone. And then I thought about how when you put it back in your phone, it's not actually a piece of string. It's a conduit for power. And then what happens to the power as it gets, it's now got to go through all these loops and stuff. How does that affect how the power gets to the phone? And so there started to be a kind of relation between power grids, power string knots that I hadn't intended when, to begin with, it was a string-like thing that I could just play with. Not knowing where the discussion was going. I ended up playing with a power cord.
Sure. We're running out of time and the power of the clock. So what maybe someone has got some, so last comment would be nice, maybe to finish off with everyone contributing a word or a gesture, as long as they're not too rude. Well, maybe actually that doesn't matter either. Angela's in the chat, if nothing is swarming with differences, thingness must require language with materiality. Wow. That's nice. Nice, yeah. Thank you all for your contributions. And anyone, last comment, word? Just really thank you for being here. For so many of you all those months, actually. And so it's with a slight sadness that we say goodbye, but we'll be back in September for more and you will hear more. Okay. So thank you, George, in particular, for all the work and the support. It always feels very differently going into this session, knowing that you are there. So, and it is at the end of a long day's work, I know. So thank you all. Have a good evening. Have a good day wherever you are in the world. Take care and see you soon. Oh, I don't want it to be over. It's not. We just have a break. We'll be back. See you in September.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. This has been a great series. I've really, really appreciated this. It's been really very generative.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.